Hello, everyone from Crime Writers of Canada. Welcome today for our discussion or our conversation with authors between AJ Devlin and Mark Grenside. You've seen my face before and weren't expecting to see me today. My name is Eric D'Souza. I will be monitoring Facebook, so if you have any questions, leave it in the chat there. And at the end of this interview, I'll be popping back in and I will read the questions for you. So for now, I'll just leave it to AJ and Mark. Have a good time, guys.
Thank you, Eric.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us. Just real quick off the top, I'd like to thank Eric, of course, Crime Writers of Canada, and Bob Harris for facilitating this exciting conversation, and a chance to introduce Mark, who writes under his initials MN Grenside, to a lot of members of Crime Writers of Canada. Mark is a UK and Malta-based author and an award-winning film and television producer who has a career that spanned decades, with highlights including working with Jim Henson and the Muppets, a huge TV event miniseries like Lonesome Dove, Merlin, Treasure Island, brokering the sale of the Hallmark International Channel to NBC, and some other really interesting nuggets and background experience that we'll get into in a little bit. And Mark has now turned to writing crime fiction, and his debut thriller, Fallout, which is available now everywhere, including
available in Europe too.
Available in Europe too. Available and Chapters Indigo in Canada, and you can order it through your local independent Canadian bookstore, with which we encourage you to do, with it being an independent bookstore day coming up the end of the month, and it's also available in audiobook. So, without any further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Mark joining us today. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm fine. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here, so it's very sad that Will Smith isn't on the island, because he could come around and give me a slap and wake me up. But so if I start dozing and snoring, somebody scream. Anyway, yeah, it's very, very good to see you, and I'm very touched and honored to be asked.
Absolutely. No, this is really exciting. So I guess I'll just get into some of these questions that we have. And so let's start off with this. You recently attended the prestigious Oxford Literary Festival, where you were interviewed and promoted Fallout.
Yeah.
With many in-person events starting to come back after being canceled due to the ongoing pandemic, what was that experience like for you to be at a live in-person event?
Well, it was a huge honor. I mean, to be at the Oxford Literary Festival. I was actually at school as a kid, not at university, but as a prep school in Oxford, and it was great to come back. The general feeling was, everybody was relieved that these festivals are coming back. I don't want to dwell too long on it. I mean, I think the main topics of general conversation were whether Random House is going to be allowed to be sold, and what effect Amazon allowing published authors to advertise is going to have. Those were the sort of general stuff that was being asked. But all in all, I just had a great time.
That's great. Was there an opportunity to go to the book fair part, or walk a floor? And if so, were you shaking hands, or were you doing sort of?
No, it's more a collection of interviews. They have writers from all walks of life, ex-politicians, historical novelists, factual drama, thrillers, and they very kindly asked me. Maybe I'll get asked again. I don't know. The food was great.
I do want to bring this up because it's I thought it was quite interesting. Fallout was originally published in May 2020. At the very beginning of the pandemic and lockdown.
Yeah.
As a writer myself, I also published a book in May 2020, and personally found pivoting suddenly to an all virtual and blog tour was definitely a challenge. How did you navigate those circumstances, with Fallout being your first novel?
Well, the timing was exquisite, wasn't it? I mean, we literally came out at the time of lockdown. Naively, I was rubbing my hands a little bit, thinking, good, that means everybody's going to start reading. Unfortunately, the first casualty was all the book tours and everything else. So it made promoting incredibly hard. But, you learn an awful lot. And in the same way as making a movie, I'm afraid publicity is half the battle. writing a book, as you well know, AJ, you know, that's half the battle. And then you have to work out how to market it, do things like this, which is no hardship. More the digital marketing is a little tiring sometimes. And then my publisher went broke. I was very lucky. It was immediately picked up by a much bigger publisher. I'm now part of Open Road Media. So I've got quite large distribution now, but it was a challenging year, putting it mildly.
Yes, I can relate to a degree for sure. I want to just take a moment to talk about Fallout because it's very unique in the sense that it's a sort of a sprawling, time-jumping, globe-trotting crime thriller, and in my opinion has a dynamite hook where a screenwriter, without giving away too many spoilers, a screenwriter writes probably the best script of his career and sends out multiple copies to friends and colleagues in the entertainment industry right before being murdered, only for the people who receive the copies to realize that each of their scripts is a little bit different, may have extra pages or contain clues that lead to the killer. Can you talk about your time as a film and television producer and how that background made you uniquely suited to tell this story?
Yeah, I just to sort of clarify a little bit, it sent to a group of people, all of whom, along with the writer, worked on a movie that suddenly stopped shooting 25 years ago.
And that's sort of one of the mysteries.
And that's the MacGuffin why it stopped writing. I think, you know, obviously I was very lucky. I had a very varied career. I was in the music business for a while. I had an artist called Nana Cherry and Soul to Soul. As you said, I worked for Jim Henson. I produced quite a lot of series and mini-series myself. And the truth of the matter is, however wonderful it sounds, unless you're super duper powerful, it's a very collaborative industry. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you get older, it's very difficult to collaborate all the time. And if you write a book, you have no one to collaborate with except a keyboard and a bottle of whiskey. And therefore, I just rose to the challenge and I thought, let's write a book. I think it's fair to say that the frame of my books is the movie industry, but the canvas on which it's written on is not necessarily the movie industry. And without giving too much away, as AJ said, this story really opens up and it has very little to do with the film industry, although it starts with the murder of a scriptwriter. And that was kind of fun. And also having worked with lots and lots of screenwriters, I suppose I was writing very much in a visual sense, as if I was directing this or art directing this as a movie. It's a conscious decision that I hope when you read it, it's very filmic in its quality. And the dialogue is much more like a movie dialogue. Dialogue is incredibly difficult to write because by the mere fact you're writing it makes it difficult, because dialogue is spoken, it is not written. And you have to keep on reading anything you write down as dialogue several times before you get it right. So that was an interesting discipline to bring to it.
I think it goes without saying there's definitely a real cinematic quality and a flair and style to your work. You mentioned previously when we spoke, you talked sort of about, I think the term you used was picture framing, and how even though the entertainment industry is the backdrop, and to a certain degree, it's almost window dressing. So it was very interesting for me because I had training as a screenwriter, and so I related to a lot of the entertainment industry side of it. But really, you don't need to be a movie buff or a film buff to enjoy this story and the twists and the turns and the thrills and the characters, I found.
No, I mean, I hope that anybody who's kind enough to read it, they'll smile and go, wow, I didn't, and now I always wondered what that was. Or it's kind of lifting the veil, and without being rude, in a relatively simplistic way. But I was very lucky in that the reviewers included Emmy-nominated producers and Oscar-winning producers and Oscar-nominated producers, all of whose reviews meant a lot to me. That isn't to say that people who review books I'm dismissing, I'm not. But when you're trying to write about an industry and the people in it go, yep, that's right, it was very encouraging.
Since you brought it up just a few moments ago, I do want to follow up on it because I had a question later, and you mentioned dialogue, and you said how one of the things that you learned in the movie business is how important it is as a writer to read your dialogue aloud. And is that something you I mean, clearly it's something you do with Follow. Is that something you do with all your work? Is that something you would encourage other authors, inspiring storytellers to do?
Yeah, listen, yes. I mean, and to everybody who's listening, I'm not being didactic here. I'm not trying to preach anything. This is just from my point of view. There are many things in scripts and screenplays that can be brought to books, which I think are beneficial. First of all, clearly dialogue. It's very important that dialogue sounds like somebody said it. The second thing, and I know AJ has done this in his books, and I tried to do it in mine, in the movie business, you enter a scene as late as possible. You don't build up the scene. You might anticipate a scene that's going to come up, but when you get into it, you're 3/4 of the way through whatever it is, whether it's an argument, whether it's an action sequence or whatever it is. And that brings real discipline to your writing, because you need to be able to not seem like it's a real visual jump for someone, but it's a comfortable jump and they're excited about it. And I think the last thing that you get drilled into making movies is that character itself is action. And I'll just give a very brief example that I mentioned to AJ, and he knows very well. In the movie Chinatown, written by Robert Towne, there is a scene with Jack Nicholson, who plays Jake Nittis, and he's sitting in the car with Faye Dunaway, and she is explaining to him that her father, Noah, is also the father of her child and everything else. And Nicholson wanted to do something to show the inattention that he had. And he turned to Towne and he said, you know what? I want to light a cigarette and not be able to do it. And if you watch that scene, you see Jack Nicholson is flicking this lighter, and the frustration in him not being able to light the lighter reflects the frustration that he's feeling and hearing when he hears Faye Dunaway explain the whole story of Chinatown. And that piece of character is great action.
I couldn't agree more. What a great anecdote. Talking about the difference between sort of maybe film as a collaborative art and writing being maybe more of a solitary activity. My professor used to say a screenplay is a blueprint for a lot of people to get their fingers in the pot for a bigger structural building, whereas a novel is more of a completed work. Do you concur with that? Do you find that to be the case?
Yes, although old habits die hard. So when I was writing, if it was a visual description or whatever, I was thinking about how a camera might pan through that scene or how it would pull focus on something. I mean, that's just my background, and that I think comes through in the book. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And to follow up on that a little bit, what influences in particular did you have and drew you to write crime fiction you always wanted to explore? And also, what in particular led you to sort of exploring Canadian crime fiction? And I know you're reading some West Coast authors in particular right now. And,
yeah, sure.
And what was your motivation for wanting to join Crime Writers of Canada as an associate member?
Oh, that's a big, long question. I'll try and keep it relatively short. Well, like many Canadians, I speak French. So I have some affinity there. My mother was Swiss French. I have a Swiss passport. I've been bilingual for a long time, and it amuses me that there is a massive country on that continent across the water that speaks French as well as English. So that always endears me to Canada. My career in entertainment certainly started in Canada because I started on Fraggle Rock, which was shot in Glen Warren Studios in Toronto. Since then, Vancouver has become Hollywood North, as you all know, and a lot of stuff that I was involved in was shot up in Canada. Lonesome Dove, the series, was shot here. We did Matt Brand's novels Black Fox with Christopher Reeve. That was a cowboy set of movies that were done up here. We did Kipling's Captain Courageous. So we did a lot of movies up in Vancouver, and it's a gorgeous city. I mean, how can you not love it? I mean, it's one of my favorite cities in the world. The food is great. It's a wonderful boiling pot, melting pot of cultures. And the city itself, you know, you've got is it the Gaslight? The gas something or other is one end of town, and then you got that ridiculous swimming pool that's like 3 times longer than the Olympic pool. What isn't there to like? And certainly in the next book I'm doing, some of it is set in the Aleutian Islands, and a little bit will be set in Vancouver, and the rest will be set in Malta for a change.
Well,
I like.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my next question. Is you are currently at work on a sequel to called The Bastion, and so I have 2 questions that I want to ask in relation to this. I'll start with this one, which we talked about the other day. You have a fascinating job on your resume in which you worked for Lloyd's of London in kidnapping and ransom insurance. How did that specific pedigree help shape the idea for The Bastion, and what can you share with us about that business?
Well, I did kidnap and ransom and products extortion, which are 2 sides of the same coin, really. It's kidnap and ransom insurance is much more common than you might believe. Basically, in the early 70s, when the oil price shot through the roof, Nixon's administration did one smart thing. They insisted that all companies continue carrying their insurance, and if they suffered a loss that was insurable that they hadn't insured against, the directors and officers of the company would be liable to be sued by the shareholders, which was a great idea because it kept all the liability insurance in place. The downside was people knew that kidnap and ransom insurance was available. So immediately a lot of key executives had to be insured, and it became a snowball. And very, very quickly, there were tens of thousands of people insured against kidnap and ransom. And I was one of the people who used to do that. It was all very secret. Only the lead underwriter knew who the person was. After that, it was a code name, and there was a value that he had to prove he could put up, or she could put up herself, and nobody else knew who the people were. So it's a highly secretive business. It's the same with products extortion. That's when people break into plants or bottling plants or food or whatever, and drop something nasty into a product, ring you up and say, I want $100 million, or people are going to die and your market share is going to disappear. And that's a big business too. It was quite a jump from that to the Muppet Show. But I made that jump. But it was a fascinating insight into a business that is much deeper than you think. And part of it is part of The Bastion. I don't want to say too much more.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's try and avoid spoilers on this next question, but I do want to bring it up. For those that might not know, can you share a little bit about Malta, the country, and how, if I believe I'm correct, it is often best known for being the location where the famous Robin Williams Popeye movie was filmed.
That is true, and Troy was shot here.
Troy.
Yeah, there's a big studio here. In fact, I shot 2 big miniseries for NBC and Sky, which needed a ship. I did Neverland, which was the backstory to Peter Pan, and I did Treasure Island, both of which needed a boat or a ship. And Malta has a big tank, and was one of the locations I looked at. In fact, in the end, we shot in Puerto Rico and we shot in Italy. But it's got a big history of movie making here. I mean, the island's tiny. You can carpet it in an afternoon. But it has, it carries a big stick for Europe. It was really the defense of Malta against Suleiman in 1560, I think, that defeated the Ottomans and stopped them coming into Europe, for which Europe owes Malta a big debt. And in the Second World War, they were bombed to bits because they were supplying fuel to the Allied army, and in the meantime, they were sinking fuel that was due to Rommel. In fact, more bombs fell on Valletta, which is the capital city here, in a weekend than fell on Coventry, which was the most bombed city in the UK for the whole war. So it's got a very interesting history, and the weather's great, and the food is great, and the people are great. It's just a bit crowded. You know, there's about 400,000 people on something the size of the Isle of Wight. So it's pretty tiny.
That's awesome. So that must be a lot of fun for you too. Now being able to write your hometown in the sequel, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. So speaking of travel and different countries, do you have any plans to visit Canada in the future? And if so,
I'd love to. Just send me an invite. I'll be there. I'll be there. You know, fast as you can say boo. No, I love Canada. I was there not that long ago. I have a couple of other businesses that I'm involved in. I set up a very large CBD business. In fact, it's the largest in Europe. And I originally called on a lot of Canadian help to start that off. So that's a reason I come over to Canada. And I have great friends in Vancouver. And I absolutely adore coming over. If I can come over for the book festival in October, I think, isn't it? I'll be there in a heartbeat.
Terrific.
With a smile.
Since you brought it up earlier, I can't help myself. It might be a bit of a silly question, but Fraggle Rock has sort of a unique history in that it was a Canadian, UK, USA co-production. I have to just ask about your time working on that, because growing up in Canada, that picture was, that program was a pillar for Sunday night entertainment for a lot of kids, and now is in the midst of a revival on Apple TV Plus. But just before we got on in this interview, you were telling me something really fascinating about how they filmed that for different countries around the world.
That's right. In fact, it was the first series commissioned by HBO. And it's a long way from Fraggle Rock to The Sopranos, but yeah, it was the very first series commissioned by HBO. We shot it at Glen Warren Studios in Toronto, but a lot of people don't understand it's a jigsaw show. So for those of you who ever saw Fraggle Rock, the Muppet creatures underground, there were no human reaction with them. They're just in their environment. And because it's Muppets, it's very easy to dub. There's no lip sync requirements. So then you had Gobo, which is slang for a light in the movie industry. He used to come out of Fraggle Rock and go into the real world with the gentleman and his dog Sprocket. Now, what we actually did was we recreated that set of literally the hole that he comes out of. And whilst in North America, he's a beachcomber with his dog. In France, he's a chef. In Germany, he's a mechanic. And in the UK, he's a lighthouse keeper. Now, because the only interaction with a live person speaks the language fluently and is not dubbed, if you ask a German kid about Die Fraggle, he will tell you it was a show made in Germany, and the French will tell you the same thing. They'll say, of course it wasn't made in America, it was made here in France. And it was a very, very clever type of show, which was totally down to part of Jim Henson's genius. And very few people even understand that the show is different in other countries.
I didn't know until a few minutes before we began this interview, which I just think is so interesting. So just to put a button on that, I have to ask, is there any chance that experience could possibly lead to you crafting, now that you're an author and telling crime stories, could it lead to a story involving Muppets and murder?
going to be tough. I'll probably get sued for telling you this, but right at the beginning, when Henson was working on the Muppet Show, they were the highest paid writers probably in the world, and he used to pay them an extra script in which they could write anything. It was never to be broadcast, but out of those slightly, shall we say, R-rated, X-rated scripts came scenes that they actually eventually used in the Muppet Show. The ballroom scene, for example, was a bedroom scene originally with all the Muppets, and it became that scene. It's unfortunately, it's very much of its era. The writing on the original Muppet Show is sheer genius because it doesn't talk down to kids. It doesn't make sneering remarks for the adults, and yet everybody enjoys it. It was a fantastic experience to be part of that group, even though I was very low on the totem pole. Anywhere you went in the world and you said you worked for the Muppets, I mean, it was fantastic. It had its downsides occasionally, but you know, I remember we were doing a show with Michael Jackson, and he refused to talk to Jim, who was directing the show, unless he put Kermit's glove on his hand, and then he would talk to Kermit.
Sounds about right. So just going back to Fallout,
Yeah.
right here, which I tore through very quickly. I'm curious because with me personally, my training was from screenwriting, so it was a very natural progression. Probably the only way I was really comfortable at taking a crack at writing a novel.
Yeah.
Go through it through the lens of a first-person narration, which dovetails nicely with a lot of crime fiction. So there's a history there. What you do in Fallout that I think is very impressive is there are so many timelines and storylines and characters, and it's all kind of sprawling, but it all kind of connects. And I never felt lost at once working my way through the book. Now, was that always the intention for it to have sort of this epic feel to it, or was that something that sort of evolved organically as you were writing it?
A bit of both. I'm afraid I take quite a long time to write books because I only start with an idea. I tried once to write a short version of the book and then elongate it, and it didn't work. I found writing, a lot of it is inspirational. Whilst writing, I would think at certain points, what is the least expected thing that the reader is expecting to happen? And if I could make that work, I would do it. In terms of timelines, the one thing, as you know, AJ, when you're writing scripts, you have a big board and you put up each act, each scene on a board, and you do them on a straight timeline. Then you start moving them around. So I have 3 timelines going through Fallout, one in the 1940s, one in the 1970s, and one today. And although, thank you, AJ, for saying it, they cross over and eventually all meet relatively seamlessly, actually, each timeline I had as a linear progression, and then I cut them up and I wove them or plaited them, as there are 3 of them together. And that's how I worked it.
Interesting, very interesting. So having completed your debut novel and with the success that you've had with Fallout, has your process changed? So you just gave us a really great insight into sort of how you crafted Fallout. With the Bastion, is it similar in the sense that it's sort of a broad-based story with multiple characters, or
it's similar? It's got multiple characters. Okay. It has 2 MacGuffins. It has a movie MacGuffin that kicks it into gear, and then it has a much bigger MacGuffin behind it. You know, I probably have too many characters in my stories, and I counteracted that again, which a lot of people found helpful. I have a cast of characters at the beginning of my book with a brief line underneath them as to who they are and what they do. And a lot of people went, that was great. You know, I could go back, I just go, oh, that's who that person is. And then, as in any book that we all read, after a while, you know, it's like riding a bicycle, then you remember who everybody is. But I found that really useful to have a cast of characters at the beginning of the book. But no, the process is the same. I'm slugging along. I find writing very less time consuming than editing. So what I'll do is I'll start a chapter with an idea of what it's going to be, and I'll bash it out. I only type with 2 fingers, which for 450 pages on my first one, I wore out a number of keyboards. All the ink came off, the letters. But I find that if you are writing about various characters, you have to compartmentalize them in your mind as to who they are. And when you're writing the story, as I said, I'll write a chapter very quickly and it'll be garbage, but it'll have the essence in there that I want, the lanterns, as we say in script writing, that I need in that scene, the key elements. And then I'll go back to the beginning and I'll rewrite it 4 or 5 times. So actually writing the chapter is quick, but actually finishing the chapter, and that's before you re-edit when you finish the whole book, that takes a long time.
So it sounds like it would be safe to say that you agree with the old adage that writing is rewriting. Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, the only thing you write once is a check, and you don't write many of those anymore.
Just so in familiarizing myself sort of with you know, your background, there's some really interesting things. So I just want to ask real quickly, you're a known lover of cooking, and
yes,
in particular classic cars. And,
yes,
and you're familiar with Porsche, Ferrari, Maserati. You also have some preferred dishes, including duck legs, lamb and hay, and prawns and fennel. Any chance these passions of yours will be turning up in the Bastion or any future works, whether they're used as something as simple as character details or perhaps even being intrinsic to the plot?
Well, I have 2 characters. It's a 2-handed story. A man who's a producer and a woman who's a set designer. He has a classic car. He has a Maserati Mistral. There are frequent comments between the 2 of them actually about food, depending on where they're staying or where they are, as there is with alcohol. And travel is my other passion. I've been to 119 countries. And I like to mix up in a book locations we all know, central London, Los Angeles, with places that we don't know, like in Fallout, Philippines. So yes, long-winded answer to yes, my passions do come into the book. Even I had a pug called Cato who appears in the book for posterity. He's dead now, poor thing.
So that definitely comes across and was one of the things I enjoyed. It almost felt at times like you were traveling with the characters and you're just getting insight to these places, and it makes you want to go out and, you know, eat tapas and try fine wines. And so there was a lot of sort of escapism and whimsy that I found, you know, through travel sort of as a conduit, that was so enjoyable as you're reading and unpacking and figuring out this, you know, decades-long mystery. So that I think that definitely comes across. In your
and then there's the Cannes Film Festival, you know, which everybody's heard of, but very few people have been to. I've been to Cannes. I used to go 3 times a year, twice for television, once for film. I've been to Cannes 60 times. I've certainly walked up and down that croisette enough times to walk back to England. So I really do know it quite well.
That's yeah, they definitely your world travels comes across in your work for sure. But in your travels, 2 things absolutely jumped out at me because I don't think I would ever have the courage myself to do it. One, while on a shoot, you played with lions, and then two, while in Costa Rica, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if this is true, please share with us, you actually wrestled a crocodile?
Yeah. Yeah, there is a method how to wrestle a crocodile. You have to be very drunk to start with, but essentially what you do with a crocodile is if it's lying out in front of you, well, first of all, if it's in the water, you get its tail and you pull it gently and it doesn't realize it's moving. And then you quickly pull it up the bank. Once you've got it on the bank and it's lying out in front of you, essentially what you do is your knees fall onto the rear legs and then your hands go over his eyes. As soon as you do that, he stops. Then you leave one hand over his eyes, you put the other hand under his chin and you lift the chin up. And if you can do that, you've wrestled an alligator.
That's wild.
So, yeah, the lions were okay, except that when I was with a very big animal wranglers called Bristow's, who are now in South Africa, but they originally were in Zimbabwe. They produced the elephant with one tusk for the power of one and white hunter, black heart. And yeah, they had a bunch of lions, and I said, "Wow, I've always wanted to sort of play with lions. Can I go into the compound and play with them?" And they said, "Sure." So I'm in there, and you know, these big bloody things, and rolling around with them, and then I eventually get up and walk out. And the guy said, "I wouldn't do that." I said, "What do you mean? They're tame lions?" He said, "No, there's no such thing as a tamed lion. There's just a working lion. I wouldn't have done that for anything." So there you go. Stupid things we all do.
I'm waiting for a crocodile to show up in a book being wrestled.
That's how to do it. I'm telling you, kneel on his rear legs, hand over his eyes.
So you clearly have a lot of passions. Another one, you're a big fan of music. I'm just curious, as a writer myself, sometimes, and I know it depends on the writer, but sometimes writers will be very inspired or listen heavily to music while they write. Some like silence. Was there any music or anything that you used when crafting Fallout? And if so, is that essential to your process, or is that something that is just sort of contingent upon the current project?
I have to be, it sounds very corny, this, I have to be in the mood. So if I'm not in the mood, I've got the cleanest nails, the cleanest shoes, the cleanest desk. I probably had a good shave. I'll do anything. But once I start, I have to have silence. I can't write with music or anything, because either it's distracting or sometimes it can give you the wrong inspiration, if you know what I mean. Depending on the mood of what you're writing, music is all about mood. And if you're doing an action scene and you're listening to, Carly Simon, it just doesn't quite work. Much as I love Carly Simon.
Probably
she's
not.
Having a good day, isn't she? I mean, if Simon and Schuster get bought out, she's going to make another $1 zillion, because her dad was the person who set up Simon and Schuster, Carly Simon's father.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why she paid for everybody. She did. She supported Joni Mitchell. All the girls were supported by Carly Simon.
Wow.
Sorry, we digress.
This is fascinating stuff. So I'm just taking a look at at our timeline here, where we are running toward the end of our session, and I know there are a lot of people tuning in that are going to have some questions for you. But before we get to that, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least ask, given your just very unique background, and knowing there are a lot of Canadian crime writers in particular who have written books and published books and are very interested in adapting, or the process of adapting their IP, their intellectual property of a novel into, or for the screen or for television or for streaming, which is quite so big right now. Are you able to leave us with any advice or tips for writers and authors who are hoping to go that route with the traditional book, but then getting involved in adapting it for the screen? Yeah,
I mean, I've done quite a lot, and I've done various types. So I've done Public Domain. I've done Robbie Louis Stevenson for Treasure Island, which I did for Sky and NBC. That was driven by casting. Eddie Izzard, who's a very well-known English comedian, agreed to play Long John Silver. And we got Donald Sutherland and Elijah Wood and a few other big stars that came in, because obviously the book is a known quantity. I optioned a whole load of short stories from Patricia Highsmith. That was completely different. That was dealing with her agent. I knew that in France she was highly regarded, and I did a deal very quickly with a French broadcaster and then with an English broadcaster. I've done books. I've done, oh God, hang on, I've got to look up the chap's name now. You're all going to laugh at me for not remembering. Arthur Haley, is it, who did Hotel. I did a miniseries on his book, The Detective. I think the one thing that was very obvious to me a long time ago is it's extremely difficult to put a book into a movie. And that's why we did so many as miniseries. And in those days, miniseries were only 2 times 90 minutes. But you had more room to make a movie. And in fact, what really broke the mold was Lonesome Dove, which was, I think, 6 hours of Larry McMurtry's book. And I know it's 20 years ago now, probably more, but that was the first that started to create this new genre, which is now anything from 6 to 12 hours on telling a story. And I think we were talking, AJ, they have done 2 versions of Elizabeth Holmes, who set up Theranos. And there's a mini series at the moment called The Dropout, which has got 8 episodes. The last one is broadcast tomorrow, which has been fantastic. And there is a movie coming out. Goodness me, remind me, AJ, the lady from, you know, Hunger Games, Jennifer Lawrence. Oh, yeah. Jennifer Lawrence is going to play Elizabeth Holmes in a 2.5-hour movie. I'm sure it'll be brilliant, but it cannot compare to the 8 hours that Hulu have done. So I think if you've written a book and you are thinking about turning money into light and doing something for the screen, I think unless you are a billion-selling writer, it's got to be for the digital channels. And then you have to understand how you can carve it up into 10. Yeah. But that's where it's going, and all the great, if you want to write it yourself, that's one thing, but if you don't, all the great writers have now become showrunners in the United States. They have much more control than they do on a feature film, and they do their subjects great justice. I mean, look what Reese Witherspoon has created with her her film television business, Sunny Days or whatever it was. She sold it for 600 million. But she made a phenomenal amount of really good books as miniseries, you know, Big Little Lies, etc., etc. I think the other thing is you have to be realistic. You know, you have to be realistic as what is broadcast. Historical novels are very, very tough. Not a lot of them get done. You got to be able to think of who, you know, you can cast. I'm not saying, you know, a particular person, but a particular group of people. You've got to understand, if you're going to try and get it in the United States, why would a broadcaster do it? Right. You know, he's not going to do a thriller set in France. You're going to have to go to the French to do that. Do you know what I mean? So everybody, you've got to be realistic. And the last thing is, you can't do a book, except for Life of Pi, of course, with a lot of self-thought, reflections and everything else. Film is film. There is some degree of movement, action, interplay between people in it. It's not always the same as a book. Sorry. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense, and just excellent insight. that given your experience, you're able to provide. And I think it's safe to say, or I think I can confidently say that there's no way that this could be as good as a 2-hour movie as it would be as a 10-hour streaming event.
I hope so.
But I just think that's really cool how you were kind of in on that and almost ahead of your time in terms of working on those miniseries. Because it's now the gold standard, and people refer to it now as sort of the golden age of television with streaming. And so that's just very interesting stuff. So I think what we're going to do now is we are going to throw back to Eric, and we want to make sure we have enough time allotted for people to who've joined us, and thank you for tuning in, to ask Mark questions about his incredibly varied career and any questions they might have about future projects. So Eric, if you can pop back in, and we can find out.
Do we have any questions, Eric?
You have a handful. So.
Oh, well, there we go.
Winona has a couple, so Winona can't. She wants to ask actually a question to both of you. So both of you have experience in screenplay writing, and she wanted to know how that influenced your novel writing. She was very interested in, do you outline things? I know she was saying things are very outlined when you screenplay writing, and you've touched on being a pantser and being a plotter already. But did your past screenplay writing affect the way you approached a novel? And she actually asked it to both of you because she knows you.
Yeah, AJ, you answer first. I've been
sure. Well,
yabbering on.
I'll just reiterate what Mark said about dialogue, trying to make it snappy, reading it out loud, starting a scene as late as possible. I know I was nervous and overwhelmed with the thought of writing 70,000 words as opposed to a 110-page screenplay. So that was a little daunting, but once I realized the mechanics were the same for structuring a screenplay as it would be structuring a novel, I found myself sort of at ease with the process. Although it has, for me personally, I have relied less and less on outlines. It's still, I think, always going to be a foundation for me as I craft my work. But I was very stringent and very disciplined with the first outline, whereas I find I'm getting more flexible now with the more experience I'm developing. But I'm curious to hear how Mark would answer this.
I'm ashamed to say that I was a producer and executive producer, so I'm afraid I barked and yelled at writers. I now have a lot more respect for them than perhaps I displayed in the past. But as I mentioned earlier, and as what AJ has said, dialogue, coming into a scene late, being able to set a visual interpretation with the minimum amount of adjectives as possible. I mean, these are all film traits. The great scripts have very little dialogue, is the truth. So, that's all I can say. I just apologize to any screenwriter that I've said, just rewrite the screen in 20 minutes and we'll do another take.
It gives you a new appreciation to the creative process, doesn't it? Sort of as a very quick follow-up, when you're writing a novel, while you're writing, typing, are you seeing it visually? Like, oh, this would convert easily into scenes and to a show, or is it completely different?
Is this to me? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's just how I write. I hope, very visually. And when you read Fallout or the follow-up, I'm hoping that the reader is like he's watching a movie or she's watching a movie.
I totally agree. I don't know how to craft a story really any other way, and I find I'm drawn most to crime fiction that does that creates a movie in my mind's eye, and that's just makes for a very cinematic reading experience.
Just read some Raymond Chandler, and
yeah,
it's a master at work.
Absolutely.
All right, different subject, but still from Winona. She was curious to know, basically, right now you're in marketing phase, promoting your book, and I guess AJ, you get in this phase too. Can you turn it off and switch and do some of your art? Like, are you still working on a book while you're out promoting all of this, your current book, or are you strictly in a marketing mode right now?
Oh, good no. doing hundreds of things. I'm trying to take a company public at the moment. So, that's probably being a producer. You're so used to spinning so many plates in the air at the same time. Yes, you have to compartmentalize it. You cannot start writing something and then pick up the phone and speak to the Wall Street Journal or something on something completely different. That you can't do. But I find mixing disciplines relatively easy if I can apportion the right amount of time.
Yeah, I have to echo that for sure. And I imagine this would be the same for you, Mark, because you're writing characters now in 2 books rather than 1.
Yeah.
But I find that if I stop, no matter what promotion or what I might have going on, if I stop writing, I start to I feel with each story I get to know my characters better, and then if I take too much time away, I become disconnected from them.
Yeah.
So I like to, even if it's something as simple as just a throwaway standalone short story or something,
Yeah.
I like feeling connected to my characters, so I try to keep that going.
This one's just for Mark, and you'll see why. Magnus, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try your last name because I would mess it up. But Magnus asked,
Come on, give it a go.
it would be insulting if I tried. So I'm curious how you get into specializing in kidnap, ransom, and extortion insurance. What made you the right fit for this line of work, and what opened those doors? I imagine it's not an easy job to just apply for.
Yes and no. I mean, I was working at Lloyd's at a time when that kind of insurance was exploding because of the reasons I gave you. Yeah, I started off in marine insurance and, but like anything in life, if it interests you, you gravitate towards it. I mean, I got involved in quite a lot of stuff. I did arms insurance and for GM, and I did all sorts of the weird and wacky stuff. I was very young at the time. I must have been 21 or something, 22. It's for a story for another interview maybe, but I got involved in some stuff over the Falklands War about the Exocet missiles. And I just went, I don't need to be handed by security services at 23. I want to get out. And I'd always wanted to be in film and television. And I was very lucky I had a connection to Jim Henson. And when I went to see him and he offered me a job, we made a deal. I said I would never, ever discuss what I did before I worked for the Muppet Show. And I never did until he died. I never told anybody what I did.
Thank you. Jeremy's here. You both mentioned JT Simmons. Says, hi guys. I'm enjoying Fallout immensely, and I especially like the fantastically fleshed out Jonathan. What was the process of creating such a character?
I don't know. It's the creative process, isn't it? If I could bottle it and sell it to other people, I'd start writing books. I don't know. You shape things on people. I mean, if I told you who I shaped the agent on, I'd probably be sued. But Jonathan, I don't know where he came from. He came from the back of my head somewhere. I'm glad he's enjoying it.
Magnus just gave me a break, spelled out his name phonetically. So, hi Magnus. Scala Grimson. Still not perfect. All right. Mary Lee O'Neill asks, where can I buy your book? In Vancouver. Is your book in stores? I don't know if you know that answer. I don't know if you looked it up.
Yes,
AJ.
it is.
But definitely we can buy it online, right?
Yeah, but it's in stores too. It's in the big. No, I'm going to get shouted at.
Indigo Chapters?
It's Indigo Chapters, yeah. It's in the big stores.
Amazon. You can also request any book from your local independent bookstore as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Just a reminder, it is available in audiobook because some people really prefer that format. And I imagine The Bastion, when it comes out, will come in audiobook as well.
Yes, it will.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
That was it for the online questions. I do have a feeling there's like a future interview between the two of you. We could ask you a lot more about the movie role and or the movie world. And from this side, being a writer, I know a lot of our audience would be very curious to your insights, and we can just talk about that one day. But that'll be a future conversation. Mark, you definitely have a lot of background you could pull for a lot of inspiration for future books, and I'm waiting to see Murder at Fraggle Rock. How that'll go.
Yeah, yeah.
You're getting a lot of hearts and a lot of waves online. So thank you very much, both of you, for attending today. It was a lot of fun. I always enjoy when I get to turn my camera off and just listen. I definitely enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you.
This was
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, AJ.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Eric, and for everybody who's up and awake at this time. I hope I haven't bored you all, and thank you very much for your input.
For us, it's 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock. It's not quite 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's 2 o'clock in the morning here. That's why I'm slowly sipping my rum.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
See you, everyone.
Eric, and thank
Good
you,
night.
Crime Writers of Canada and Bob Harris for arranging all this.